Hey, this is Chris from homes719.com, and I'm doing a quick video today for my buyers to give them a general introduction to the contract to buy sell, also known as the offer. This video is not intended to replace a one-on-one conversation with you to explain this contract. What it is designed to do is to give you a high-level general understanding of what the contract to buy sell looks like, so that when you see it for the first time, it's not in a situation where you need to write an offer, right? I want you, the typical steps that I take is I show my clients something like this to get them introduced to the form. We might be looking at houses at that time, doing showings, things like that. This allows them to watch this video at their leisure. And then when we get a little bit closer, I do a one-on-one with them to show them exactly what it kind of looks like based on their circumstances and their funding. I typically pick a house we might have already looked at and use that as the data for the form, and we go through it again. And so we can ask, I can explain very specifically based on their situation what that contract to buy sell, the offer again, would look like in their situation. So this is, again, just to introduce you to it, get you a general understanding of it. It's a 20 some odd page contract written by the state of Colorado. So the more times you see it, the more comfortable you'll be with it. It's very important that you're very comfortable with it. You're buying whatever hundreds of thousands of dollars of house with this document. You're defining in it the terms and conditions that you primarily must do to buy it. So this form is very much written in the favor of a buyer, not a seller. You have a lot of outs. The seller has very few. So, knowing what's in this form, how it's used, at least at the high level is what I'm trying to do here. And then we can, I can take it to 201 and 301 as we get a little closer to writing an offer specific to your situation. So I'm going to share my screen right now and try to get through this in a reasonable amount of time. Like I said, it is a 20-page document. So we'll see how it goes. All right. So contract buy sell. I'm going to keep myself up here in the corner for you, so hopefully some people like that. All right, so this is February of 2024 when I'm writing this, doing this video here. And this particular form, again, is written by the state of Colorado. It is the form that all realtors have to use unless an attorney has written a different one, and you are the client for that attorney. We're allowed to use that. In that case, I can't really explain that form. I'm not allowed to do that. The attorney would do that for you. So I can explain this one. I've been trained in it, used it a bunch of times, so I'll do that. All right. So right out of the gate, you can see contract to buy sell is what I was referencing a minute ago. This is also known as the offer. It's the contract to buy and sell real estate. All right. So the first thing here is the date would be the current date that the contract was written. It wouldn't be signed yet. It's the date that was written. Might be a day before you sign it. And then we got in here, the buyer agrees to buy and sell, and the seller agrees to sell the property described here. Remember, this document is to get the buyer and the seller to agree to the terms and conditions of the purchase. Right? So we got who the buyer is, and here in this example, it's got some default stuff in it, right? But we'd have your name as it is legally described on your ID, or how you want to take title. If you wanted to do a business, we can flip that and make it so we put a business in there. All right. And then we have, how do you want to take title? Joint tenants, tenants in common, and other. Typically, if you're married, it usually ends up in this kind of bucket. If you were previously married and have kids or someone else you want your share of the property to go to, if you die, it might end up in this bucket in the tenants in common, and other in severity if you're single. It's kind of where it usually kind of falls out, but definitely research that a little bit if you have some specific circumstances and you want to make sure how you're taking title to the property, how it's described as your ownership percentages and all those fun things. This contract is not assignable. We'll get into that if we need to, but that's more of a complex subject. Who the seller is, that would be in here if I pulled in some data with what the property is. So we'd have El Paso County, we'd have the legal description of the property. This is not the address, so it'd be lot and block. 21 at such and such neighborhood kind of thing, El Paso County. And then down here, we would have the address of the property that you intend to purchase. And then we get into section 2.5, inclusions. What's included with the property? If you were to buy it, what can you expect is automatically included? Right? Because every person has a different opinion. Well, it had curtains in it. So aren't the curtains included? Not the rods. Aren't those included? The TV is attached to the wall. Is that not included? What about the windows? The windows are there. So this paragraph kind of goes through and outlines what should you presume is included unless it's excluded. So that's kind of what this paragraph goes to. And it says inclusions if attached, exclusions if it's not attached, other inclusions, right? So we get into things like refrigerator, microwave, range, dishwasher. We want to outline, if you want those items when you purchase the property, we need to outline it in here. Now, just be aware that there becomes a limit in personal property where you can't use mortgage funds to buy everything you might want. You might have to do a personal property agreement and buy that in a separate document, which I can help you with. But we can't outline like pool tables necessarily, hot tubs, all these things, tractors. It becomes a limit. We've got to talk to the lender depending on what we want to put into we want included. So this is a box where we can, at will, put whatever we want in here. Right. So if you want it included in the purchase, we can put that in there. If we get to a point where I think we're asking for something a little abnormal, I'll probably say, hey, we need to take a time out here and talk about a personal property agreement and try to draft that as well. Encumbered inclusions, right? In today's day and age, there are all sorts of ways you can buy things for your house that you haven't really paid for yet, like solar, where you might have done a lease program or you're making payments over time. Propane tank might be another one of those things, kind of like that, where you're making it's an encumbered, right? You have debt that you're paying. What's going on with that debt when you buy it? And are you taking you as the buyer? Are you taking over the debt for the seller? So we want to understand that. The seller will disclose that to us so we understand that the solar system or a water softener is not paid for yet, and we need to understand that it's there, and you get to decide if you're taking on that debt or not. So know that. If we got outbuildings and stuff like that, we like to just declare in here that, hey, yeah, we want the barn, right? That is included, right? The barn that we saw in the backyard, we want that, or the shed. We want to make sure that's outlined in here. Lease documents, again, the following personal property is currently leased to the seller, which will be transferred to the buyer at closing. Well, do you want that? Again, we kind of outlined some stuff. So I have some notes in here to try to help me remember about different things: home appliances, security systems, home furnishes, smart devices, water heaters, water softeners, solar, propane. All these things could possibly have some kind of lease on them from the seller that we need to make sure we understand before we submit our offer. Exclusions. What is the seller excluding? For example, they might exclude a TV that's mounted on the wall. That is not included, right? If they don't exclude it, technically it's included. You can see that up above. But if there is a TV on the wall and we all know that it's included and you say, I want that, let's make sure we put in here what we want. We do want that TV on the wall. Or exclusions, we don't want that TV on the wall. We need to put that into the 2.6 box here and say, hey, our offer is excluding that TV. We don't want it. You got a better one, for example. Water rights, well rights. There are some properties here in the El Paso County area that have wells. And when we get into that, it becomes a little bit interesting on how we draft things so that we make sure that the water rights get transferred to you, as well as the well rights and permit to access the water that has been righted to you. Hopefully that makes sense. But if we get into well stuff, I have to walk you through a little bit differently. Again, this is a high level introduction to this document, not in a detailed one specific to your situation, right? So that this section kind of gets into well and water rights and water certificates and conveyance and how do you get ownership of it, all that fun stuff. Water rights, do you have the right as a buyer? Do you want to have the right to terminate this document, to review the water rights and say, nope, maybe it has a well and you intend to use so much water and you want to use it for cattle. Can you do that? We need to understand that in advance. And if that's kind of the case, then we want to make sure that you do have the capacity by selecting does the right to terminate if the water rights are not acceptable to you. Now, at the beginning here, we kind of went over a whole bunch of stuff there, really quick, a little bit. This next section, dates and deadlines, is a little bit different. So each one of these rows, the item number, it indicates this row is number 1. Reference indicates that this line, row 1, references in this section 3. So for example, row 4, section 8, if you want to know more about off-title objection deadlines, you would go to section 8, look for that subsection, and you would tell you all about what this deadline means. All right, so I'm going to kind of go through some of these right now, again, at a high level. And when we get further down, I'm not going to go as a detail because I've kind of already gone over it, just so you have an idea. But this is how this table works. It's really nice. Most states don't do this. Most states, the deadlines that you can use to terminate the contract, which is what this is all about, are distributed throughout the contract everywhere. So it's much harder to find. So for the way you would use this as a buyer is you would say, okay, my alternative money deadline, the deadline by which I have to have my earnest money delivered to wherever, is within 3 days of MEC. And this MEC is described in here in another spot, but it's mutual execution of the contract, meaning the seller and the buyer both sign. You have 3 days after that to get the earnest money to a location that I will tell you about. All right. Another thing, I'm going to just kind of bump back up here a little bit. What does this mean? This time of day deadline, right? Well, all of these after this one have dates. So what time on that date does the deadline trigger? When is it over? I like to use 7 p.m. on all mine. If I don't put anything in there, it's 11:59 p.m. So what does that allow for? If I leave it at 11:59 p.m. and this deadline's on 8/11 of 2023, then the buyer and the seller's agent, the buyer's agent can still be talking about stuff at 11 o'clock at night because the deadline is not expired yet. That is not fun. Let me tell you, not fun to do. So I force it and say, hey, let's do it at 7. Let's get all the business done before 7 o'clock at night so we can all sleep. All right, let's not keep it up to midnight. I say I set this to 7. This is your offer. Everything in here is yours. I fill it out kind of like as a draft to work through and kind of give you the norms. How far these dates should they be out? How long is acceptable? How long is needed? That's how I draft this thing. I have a little tool over here that I can use, and I can pre-populate. The blue dots indicate that I want it populated based on a specific criteria and how many days out. And then I can say from the contract date or the closing date. So this one works forward, this one works backward. But anyway, I have the ability to do that, to fill this whole thing out in a uniform way almost every time I fill it out. So it makes it very easy to make sure that I try to get these dates in the right windows that we want them in, right? So title work. We talk about title. Title is a document that describes ownership, and we wanted to make sure that you have sufficient time to review that information and understand what your restrictions are, understand what your tax obligations are. So in this case, the buyer would have until 8/11 of 23. So if I go back up here for a second, 8/7 is when we drafted it. 8/11 is when we would have to get all the information from title. They sent it to us. And then you have to 11 to tell me that you're going to object to this contract. And we want to submit a record title objection deadline. So we have to get it by the 11th. You have until the 16th to review it and tell me that you want to object so that I can fill out a record title objection form and let the seller know, hey, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, we want to, the buyer wants to object to the current title stuff, and or maybe you just want to terminate. You're not buying the house with that clause in there, whatever the title thing is, right? And you're terminating the contract. All right. Off record title are things where they haven't been recorded yet. So let's say you're buying land and the seller has authorized the neighbor to drive across their property for whatever reason. And they never recorded that agreement, right, between the seller and the neighbor. That would be an off record, not recorded title thing that the seller would have to tell you so that you can say, no, Mr. Neighbor, you're not driving across my yard anymore. All right, if I buy this thing, I'm out. So if that's the case, you know, if the neighbor's been using it for a long time, there's some legal consequences to that. So we would want to know that the seller has to tell us that, so you have the ability to review it again and object by that date. And then we have until 8/22 to resolve the matter. If you object to either one of these, maybe the seller has a way to fix it and make it satisfactory to you. If they do, they have to do it based on this title resolution deadline of 8/22. And then you get to review that and agree, right? If both parties agree, then great. If both parties don't agree, contract is dead. We try to get the earnest money back and that kind of stuff. All right. So that's kind of, I'm going to pause here for a second. This is kind of how the whole form works. All these dates and deadlines just about in here are for the buyer to learn something about the property, decide if they're good with it and they want to continue with the offer, or they're not, and they can either object or they can terminate. Now, you can't object in all cases, and I'll get into that in a minute. Sometimes you just have to terminate. But this entire form is kind of built like that. Your ability to learn something, decide you either want to continue or you're out. Homeowners Association is a great example of that. You don't get to object to the Homeowners Association, right? Whatever the Homeowners Association has for the covenants, it's going to stay that way. You don't get to, as the buyer, decide that I want to park my car in the front yard. So if you learn that that's something you want to do, I want to be able to park my stuff wherever I want. It's my land, right? Well, the HOA, if it has one, probably has differing opinions to that. And if you learn by reading all the documents that I'm going to send you for the HOA after it's under contract, if you learn that there's something in there that, nope, I want to park my boat in the backyard of my RV and this HOA won't let me, then we get to terminate. Bam, we get to terminate. So in here you see that there's no dates filled out. There's no dates filled out. That's just how my template is built. If there was an HOA involved in or associated with the property we're going after, I would put dates in there. So we could do that, right? All these dates are optional. You don't have to have all these dates. And I would encourage you only to use the ones that you're actually going to look at and read and dig into. These title ones, almost by default, you really should have them, especially if it's in a rural area, so that you have the opportunity to just make sure that everything is good. If there's no HOA, I'm not going to recommend to you we need an HOA deadline. That's just silly, because the seller looks at it and goes, this buyer's an idiot. He's asking for a deadline on an HOA and there isn't one. Why would they do that, right? So we need to really think about how much friction you want to add to the offer, because every one of these is something typically the seller has to provide to us for you to review and have the ability to terminate the offer based on it. If you're not going to read the information provided by the seller, don't ask them for it. Don't create friction in the offer, because if your offer has less of these in it than a competing offer, sometimes that helps you win. All right. Seller's property disclosure. The seller will almost always provide to you a very lengthy form, kind of like this one, that discloses to you all the things that they know about the property, both visible and not. They're supposed to give you kind of the full history. You should have the same knowledge and information about that property as the seller does. So they'd have to present that to us on or before 8/11 at 7 p.m. Right? If the property is built before 1978, then we'll ask for a lead-based paint disclosure. So if the seller is aware that there's lead-based paint in there, they'll disclose it. If they're not aware, they'll also get a form and it'll say they're not aware of any. Does that mean that there isn't any? No. So if you're really concerned about lead-based paint, then you talk to me We make sure during the inspection period that we get some an X-ray of the wall and decide, determine if there is any lead-based paint in there that you need to worry about. All right. You can do that on a house pre-78 or after 78 if you want to, but generally speaking, lead-based paint was no longer produced after like 1977 or something, so that's why they use 78. New loan application stuff. So you can see here, loan and credit. We're getting into loan stuff. Are you using a loan? Well, is your application complete? You might say yes. Let me tell you, it's not. It's not complete until there's one of these contract buy sell signed, presented to the mortgage officer so that they can look at it. That is when your application is complete. So typically we do put a date in here for that. Loan term deadline. So you get the ability to look at once we submit an offer. Sorry about that. I just noticed it's snowing outside. You get to submit an offer that's been accepted to your mortgage loan person. Then they look at it and they say, okay, you're buying this property, it's in this area. Okay, let's lock in your rates. Here's what your mortgage payment is going to be, right? You have until 8/23 to decide that, nope, do not want that mortgage payment. Sorry, nope, I need to terminate on that. All right. That after an 8/24, you no longer get to terminate because you don't like the terms of the loan. So we want to make sure that the mortgage person gets everything locked in before that, and you know what your mortgage is going to be, and your taxes and your insurance, all these things that are out of pocket, that are all locked in. But this specific line is about loan terms. And that has nothing to do with taxes, has nothing to do with insurance. Okay. New loan availability, right? This date is usually really close to the closing date. And that's because the mortgage company sometimes will recheck all your stuff just days before the closing to make sure that you still have a job. You haven't done anything silly. You haven't bought a new car, a boat, an RV. You haven't run for a new credit application. Don't do any of these things. Your mortgage person should be saying that, but don't do any of those things or anything else to do with credit, because it can cause you to no longer be eligible to get a mortgage. So don't do any of those things. Once you start this process, you don't get to buy nothing other than a house. No new credit. All right. Don't change your credit situation. Don't change your employment. Don't get a new job. If something goes really sideways and you get fired, laid off, you need to talk to your mortgage person ASAP and your realtor. Let us know what's going on. All right. So then we have buyer's credit information. This next few here are more related to a situation where the seller is your bank. It's called seller financing. All right. So you don't have to worry about that. And typically we don't use these in most transactions. That one, existing loan deadline. If the existing loan, the seller's loan is not going to be paid off, then there's some different stuff we have to do. And that's what that deadline is all about. Loan transfer for transferring loan, that approval needs to be by a certain date. So this is more of assumptions, assuming the seller's loan. Seller of private financing, if you're getting financing from mom and dad or your uncle at Ray or somebody's Roth IRA or whatever it might be, then there's some deadlines for that. Again, these all typically are blank in 99% of transactions, but they're here in case we need them and you're utilizing one of these alternative finance strategies. Then we'd want to maybe consider using one of these deadlines. Appraisal. When does the appraisal have to be done by? 8/23. Has to be done by 8/23. You get to object in 8/23. And why is that the same day? Well, appraisals are usually pretty easy. The appraisal is either comes in at or above the purchase price, or it doesn't. And when you get the documents, you know right away that we've got an appraisal problem, right? And we can object pretty quick. You don't have to study the documents, normally speaking, to figure that out. So the deadline, the appraisal is typically ordered by the mortgage person. So we go under contract. We immediately notify your mortgage person. They are aware of this contract. They are aware of the deadlines, specifically the inspection deadlines, which are coming down here a little bit. And they will typically wait to order the appraisal until you are past the inspection deadline. And that is so you don't pay for an appraisal that you don't need. So they're kind of clever about that. But this is the date by which the appraiser needs to deliver to the mortgage company, because they're the one that's ordering it. They have to give it to them. They also give it to us, normally at that same time, being us, being you and the mortgage company. I don't get a copy unless you give me one, and I do want one, so please send me one. I learned from them. It helps me out a lot. All right, so if there is a problem, we object to the appraisal to the seller. The seller has the right then to, the seller and the buyer both kind of have a period of renegotiation to see if they can keep this deal together. The seller is not obligated to sell you a property at appraised value. They're not. If we went under contract above the appraised value and the appraisal says it's worth $20,000 less, the seller is not, I repeat, not obligated to lower the price by 20 grand. They can still say, hey, you want to buy the price, you want to buy the house, it's still that you need to bring that extra 20K to the table. That's their decision, right? And this is one of those moments where the seller can, if we don't come to terms, then it kills the deal. So we get to object by the 23rd. We get, looks like 7 days here to resolve the matter. It probably doesn't take that long, but it's nice to have it sometimes, especially if there's a weekend in the middle there, for us to try to resolve the appraisal. Maybe we can ask for another appraisal. That's pretty rare that ever works. But sometimes if it's really, we suspect the appraisal is really, really wrong, then sometimes we can fight tooth and nail to get a second appraisal that might work. We want a little bit of time to do that. Survey stuff, don't typically utilize that in neighborhoods. Where these come into play, most cases are, 5-acre parcels in the middle of nowhere, 5 acres and up, where the lender or the title company want to make sure that we understand what the boundaries are and where the house is. And, is anybody encroaching on anything? Is there an easement was found in the title stuff above that we need to understand where is that? And you need to understand where that is. So if we're buying a big piece of land, we might use some of these ILC and surveys. It does also come into play in neighborhoods from time to time. So the fun thing about an ILC or a survey is they're very hard to get done. So there's a few different ways when we get there that I treat these. If we need to utilize these, how I utilize the dates. Okay. Inspection. This is what I was talking about a minute ago. We got some inspection stuff here where we have water rights, your ability and capacity to review the water rights, or mineral rights if there's any offered. In Colorado, typically you don't get mineral rights by default. You own the top surface of the land and somebody else owns the dirt under it and all the minerals under it. So inspection, home inspections. All right. So you have the ability in this contract right here to terminate on the home inspection on 8/16. A lot of times this would be also right here. Come on, clear. It's not letting me paste here. This would also say 8/16. All right, so both of these would be the same date. So you have the ability to inspect whatever you want without destroying the seller's house, unless you put it back the way it was at your own cost. You get to inspect the property, determine if you want to object or terminate based on the same date, right? You're either going to say, hey, Mr. Seller, I still buy this house if you fix X, Y, and Z. Otherwise, I'm out, right? Or you're going to tell me, Chris, I'm out and we need to terminate, right? So I do a different document that terminates it, or I do a document that says that I object to the inspection, right? So you need to know, I'd probably get into this later, but we only ask for repairs on a property. They're deal breakers. Deal breakers. Hard deal. You are not buying this house unless this is fixed. This is not the time to go on a shopping spree and ask the seller to fix a whole bunch of tiddly little things that you don't care about. All right. Sometimes market conditions allow for it. In most cases, I don't recommend it because what happens is it pisses off the seller, right? They've been living in that house for X number of years, and now you're coming in thinking that you want all these things fixed, that their house is a pile of crap. All right. So when you tell me what's wrong with the house that you object to, I highly, highly encourage you to only give me the things that are deal breakers, right? Think about what those are. Talk to your spouse, whoever that might be, if you have one, and let me know what those are, and then we work through it. If you're not really sure what some of these things cost, hopefully we got our inspection done early enough that allows us to determine what the cost of some of these items are. Or sometimes I have a good idea. They can ask me about that, right? We can review the home inspection report together. All right. And I haven't mentioned it here, but I have a great home inspector that I recommend. And I have a different video on it too, on why I recommend them. You might check it out. All right. So property insurance. Property insurance is becoming a very big thing in Colorado. It's getting very, very expensive because of hail and fire. So you'll typically see me push this date out a little bit to give you an opportunity to shop different insurance carriers to find out what the rates are and can you even get it. There are some areas here in Colorado Springs you can't get home insurance. Can't get it. Nobody will insure you. So we need to have as much time available as possible for you to determine what that is, get the coverage that you want on the property that you're going to potentially buy and know what the cost of that is, right? So this is the property insurance deadline. If you know, maybe you're looking at a property that you can't get homeowners insurance, then we have an issue and we need to resolve that through a different carrier, a different broker, see if we can get one that you do like. All right. All right. So due diligence documents, I'll get to that down below because it becomes a lot easier to explain in the section 10 here. Right. Section 10 is where I'll find out more information on that. Conditional sale. If you have a house or other property that you need to sell because you can't afford two of them, then you have a conditional sale deadline that you need to sell that house based on 8/30 to have the money to buy this one. Your lender will typically tell you, you don't get to keep that. You need to sell it or we're not going to give you a mortgage. Okay. Lead-based paint termination deadline. Again, if it's got lead-based paint, then you can terminate based on this date. You'll see in here that this 8/16 comes up a lot. This one, that one, this one, right? There's probably a few more if I kept scrolling up. It's best to be in or out about the same time as your inspection. You get everything done in those couple weeks. Get it all done, you're in or you're out, so that the seller is not annoyed. And you kind of know that you got a house in a couple weeks, right? Everything else is going good. Should be good, except for the loan stuff. The loan stuff comes later, right? We also pick kind of the closing date. So you get to tell me, Chris, I really want to close on whatever date because I'm selling my other one or I'm moving or my apartment or whatever it might be. When do you want to move in? What's the ideal date? If you picked one on a calendar, what would it be? And we plug it in there. And then sometimes I can put in here, but buyer is flexible. You know, so that way the seller knows that it's not a deal breaker if they want to change that because maybe they need to sell by a specific date to buy their house. Right? We try to, this is the ideal date, but maybe you're flexible. Maybe you're not, right? Good things to know for me. Possession date. When do you want to take possession of the property? Is it the same day as closing? Doesn't have to be. You could rent it back to the buyer or to the seller and say, hey, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, I'm willing to rent this house back to you after I buy it for a little bit because I don't need it, right? Maybe they need to close early, but you don't need to move in. Then you can put this in the offer that you're willing to rent it back to them for a certain period of time. Sometimes that gets you a win, right? Or even saying that you're willing to do that. And you'll see that below in the offer here that I have that in there by default. You just got to tell me you want to keep it. Acceptance deadline. What is that? Well, the acceptance deadline is when does the seller have to accept or decline or counter this offer right here. So they had until 8/8 at 6 p.m. to either accept this one, counter it, or it dies right there. All right. Okay. Whew. All right. That's a lot. That's a lot. I'm going to try to get through the rest of this a little bit quicker because, like I said, if you want to know more about the acceptance deadline, you go to section 27, which is down below here, right? That paragraph is going to go through this topic in detail and explain the whole thing to you. Do I recommend you read this whole contract? Yes, I do. I recommend you print it. I recommend you highlight all over it and you write notes off to the side if you have any questions about what does that mean, right? So that I can try to explain it to you. This is kind of what this review is all about. This is giving you a high level. Then you read it. then you go back and you mark things so that you can ask me about it when we go into more detail, so you understand your liability in this legal document. All right. It's very important that you understand your position fully and completely, because you're the one held accountable to it. All right. So with that said, there's some other stuff in here. Accountability terms. We talked about NA, deleted. What do those words mean in a contract? MEC, here we go. Mutual execution of the contract. That's it, it puts it right in here for you. Dates and deadlines. You know, we have some different stuff in here. What does it mean? Computation of days. How is that done? If a deadline falls on a Saturday weekend, what happens? Right. Purchase. This is a pretty important section of the contract. Section 4 here. This outlines how much you want to pay for it. So let's say the house was, you wanted to offer 500 grand. I don't care what the cost of the house was, how much they asked for it. You want to offer 500. The seller might also say, I want $5,000 in earnest money. Well, how much do you want to offer? It could be 5,000, 10,000, 500,000, 0. Any number applies, right? So you have to decide how much money that you want to write a check for in the next 3 days if this is accepted. You know, this money is applied to your down payment, so just know that. Then your new loan amount. So right now we have a $500,000 offer. We have $5,000 that we've applied. So our balance, our cash at closing right now is $495,000. That's how much you need to write a check for from somewhere, a bank, your checkbook, wherever it might be, right? So maybe you don't want to do that. Maybe you want to have a bank loan and you want to have 20% down, right? So, you know, if you wanted to do that, then we could say in here, I'm going to do a little trick here. I'm going to say $100,000 is how much, right? And now we have a loan amount of $395. And I'm going to come back up here and I'm going to put that there. Ta-da! $100,000 cash at closing. That's your down payment. So it's $5,000 now, $100,000 later. With this loan equals the full $500,000 purchase price. All right. That's how we would fill that out. If you're doing assumptions or you're doing private financing or seller financing, it gets a little different. Seller concession. There is a model that will allow you to ask the seller to provide money back to you at closing. Sometimes this is very handy if you're low on down payment funds, right? You would like to buy down your interest rate. Your mortgage person, when I talk to you about that, this is where we ask for a seller concession. This is very, very different than a seller credit. So they're not the same. If you hear those two words, ask questions, right? So you can ask in here that, hey, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, I want $14,000 back from you. There's some strategies, if you try this, that we need to talk about. If you need to do this to make the deal work, we need to talk about this purchase price. Based on the market conditions, where you're at, your situation, we might have to do some different things with this to make that work. There's not too many people that I know of that want to routinely hand you 14 grand out of the kindness of their heart. So if you need that, we need to talk about that. It's okay. Earnest money. What kind of earnest money? Good funds, right? It needs to be real money. Can't use monopoly money. And then over here, we'll put in there, who's it going to be held by? Me, the listing agent in Colorado. Most certainly it's going to be a title company. It's going to, a third party is going to hold that money. So it'll outline like Heritage Title Company is going to hold that money. And then when we go under contract, I tell you where to bring it, that kind of fun stuff. So then you can see in here, under here, we have alternative money, alternative earnest money deadline, disposition of earnest money, seller's failure to timely return the earnest money. What happens if we terminate the contract and the seller won't give you your earnest money back? Because they do have the option. The seller gets to choose if you were ethical, did everything in good faith, and they want to give you your money back or not. Right? So what happens if it's or not? Right? Buyer fails to timely release the earnest money too. The earnest money release form has some interesting stuff in there that we'd have to go through if that's the case. Good funds, it describes what that is, timely payments, availability of funds. Do you have actual money available either in cash or through a verified source? Investment account, maybe it's your lender, you're using your mortgage, whatever that might be. Do you have that? and you telling me you have it in a bank account does not work. You got to hand me a statement that has your name on it. I have it in an investment account. How fast can you get that money? You need to understand that, right? You need to understand that you have, just because you have it, do you have it? Can you get it? Right? What's it going to take? Is there going to be a penalty? I'm going to use my 401k, and then you find out later you got a penalty for early withdrawal. Maybe you don't want to do that. Things like that we need to know, hopefully well before we fill out this form. All right, so we can check it, because if you do have money, that's a whole different offer than if you don't have money that's verified. And now you're putting offers on stuff with monopoly money. All right, not a very good offer at all. You better hope you're the only one, the only offer in play, and you have a really good story that you've told me that I get to convey to them, so that we might have a chance of using that. You know, financing, what kind of financing you're using, conventional, FHA, VA, a bond, some other kind of thing. You know, we need to know that. Let's see, it talks about your loan estimate, how much your monthly stuff is. This is the assumption part, right? Above, I was telling you that there's an assumption line. We might use it, we might not. In most cases, we don't use it. So when we don't use it, I check that box. But if you are using an assumption, you might take a minute and read it. If you're not using an assumption, you're not assuming the seller's mortgage, you're not trying to do that, then you don't have to read 4.6 at all. Disregard it. Skip it. 4.7, are you using seller financing? Are you getting financing from the seller? That's different than assuming their loan. All right, if you're doing that, you're trying to do that, you need to read 4.7. If you're not, I'll check that box and you'll never see it again. All right. Financing, this is loans. This is the stuff that most buyers use because they're getting a new loan. They need to review the loan terms. They need the loan availability. You probably remember those from up above, and I went through them. These are the sections that describe what those mean to you, right? Credit, again, if the existing loan is not being released at closing, we are not paying off the seller's mortgage, then we need this section. If that's going to happen, then we check that, right? We'll know that based on the MLS listing. The MLS listing would tell us if that condition exists. So 5.3 is gone. 5.4, existing loan review. You know, again, if the existing loan is not released at closing, then this one applies. If not, it's gone. So section 6 is all about appraisals. It walks you through that. Notice to terminate, well, appraisal objection, appraisal resolution. All right. If you're using an FHA or VA loan, then there's some special terms that this paragraph gives you a whole lot more power than a conventional loan does. So you want to read through that if you're doing an FHA or VA. We'll read through these two paragraphs. You know, read through the associated paragraph, VA or FHA. All right, cost of appraisal. We get to ask in here, are you paying for the appraisal or is the seller paying for the appraisal? If you're asking the seller to pay for the appraisal, you better have a really good reason, right? And you better hope you're the only offer. It's $1,000-ish for the ad appraisal. Typically does not come out of your pocket. It gets added to the closing statements that you use when you buy the property. If you terminate, that money sits there and it gets added to the next one. Or your lender might tell you need to write them a check. So know that cost us an out-of-pocket cost could be there. But you get to ask in here when you write your offer, who do you want to have pay for that? Section 7, homeowners association, goes through all that fun stuff. I am not going through this. You can read it. If it has an HOA, read it. If it doesn't have an HOA, don't. All right. Title work, title insurance, record of title, off record of title. Let's remember those deadlines above. This is the section that talks about that. And we have some boxes in here that, you know, the seller is going to select the title company. If this box is checked, the seller will select the title company to furnish the owner's title insurance policy at the seller's expense. At the seller's expense. So this is like a $1,500 checkbox, depending. So sometimes you can ask the seller to pay for it. If you want a stronger offer, you might say, hey, I'm willing to pay for that, right? You know, it's going to be a multiple offer situation, or there's your offer is going in against another buyer. Maybe you select that so that your offer looks a little bit different than theirs, right? You're picking up more of the costs. Owner's extended coverage. So like this says above, this is insurance, just like your car insurance, but different. Protects the title. All right. if you're buying a property, I highly encourage you to also get the owner's extended coverage. This is extending or increasing your insurance coverage for the things outlined down here that you almost certainly want, because these are all the things that typically end up in court for. Adding this item here is about a $70 to $80 charge. So you get to decide if you want to cover that cost or you want the seller to do it. Again, think about this as a strategy. This is a strategy. This entire document is a strategy. Do you want to ask the seller to pay for that, or are you good paying for it? If you're not, you're not. But if you can do it, it increases the offer in your favor, right? It might raise yours above somebody else's. So you need to think about that. I'm not telling you in here to pick everything buyer. Maybe in COVID land, we did that because you had to win, right? I highly encourage you. If you don't check that box, you're not winning. It's just write it off. You're not doing. So, but if the market is more balanced, like it is today in 2024, beginning of 2024, then you might get to choose. Maybe you don't have the money for that. And if you don't, that's completely okay. So maybe you would say up here, I want the seller to pay for that. And I want the seller to pay for my owner's extended coverage. That's perfect. Okay. Don't worry about that. Just trying to pause here real quick. Sorry about that. And just pause the share for a minute. I'm not sure if it flipped back to my face there or not, but that's what that was if it did. All right. So you might pick that, and then you come down here and there's nothing to pick in these boxes. This is just information that you should read. All right. Special taxing districts. You should read that. There's a reason it's in bold. Read that. If you're in, especially if the house you're looking at is in a metro district, it'll be in the MLS documents, metro district. It'll say it right on there. All right. Tax certificate. Who's paying for the tax certificate? A tax certificate shows you what your estimated taxes are for the year when you buy it. Right. This can be, I want to say it's like $100. So who is paying for that? You or the seller. Right. Right to object and terminate to the resolution of the title stuff. All right. Oil, water, gas, mineral disclosures, if there is any, right? Most of the stuff is it's in here, but it doesn't really apply because there's no oil or mineral rights being transferred. But if there is, you definitely want to understand that stuff. Title insurance exclusions, mineral rights. Do you have the right to review minerals? Most properties do not offer mineral rights. So you're going to see me check it that way and say does not, because it's not part of the sale. Here's the section on the ILC and new survey with a couple different ways we can fill it out. If needed by the title company, then the seller pays. If needed by the lender, the buyer pays. This gets a little muddy when we look at the owner's extended coverage up above, because sometimes the owner's extended coverage triggers the need for this. So if you're paying for the owner's extended coverage, you get to pay for the ILC regardless of what this says down here, because you said you're paying for that. So an ILC can be a few $1,000s, and if it's a big property, it can be more than that. So we need to understand that a little bit and discuss it when we get there. So all this is about ILC stuff. Seller's property disclosure. This is what I was talking about. On or before the seller's property disclosure deadline, the seller agrees to deliver to the buyer the most current version of the applicable Colorado State Real Estate Commission's property disclosure form. So that form, I'm not showing it in this video, but it has a whole lot of boxes in it where, again, the seller's going to tell you about the property. If any of that information changes, it's like a blizzard outside right now. If any of the information changes, then they have to tell you, even after they filled out the form and signed it. They still have to tell you that, right? So as a buyer, sometimes buyers think, oh, this seller's doing this because they're trying to get multiple offers so they can hike up our thing. I've never heard of any of that silliness happening. Never heard of it. Never been part of it. Playing shenanigans. No, I've never done it. So just know that to be the case across the board, including in the seller's property disclosure. If they are aware of something and they don't tell you, they're held liable for it because they have to tell you. Again, here's a section in here about adverse material defects. that they have to tell you things that if you knew, it would change, and it would have changed your decision. They have to tell you. So basically, they have to tell you everything. From time to time, do they forget things? Yep. They're still liable for it because they were supposed to tell you. If you find out later that they knew and maybe your basement flooded and they didn't tell you about some other issue in the area, that's an opportunity to consider litigation potentially, right? They have to tell you. Additionally, if I know about it or the listing agent knows about it, we cannot hide it. We have to tell you about it. As soon as we know, we can't, oh, I know there's this situation going on, but I'm not going to tell the buyer because that's going to ruin the deal. Can't do it. Got to tell you. All right. And this kind of gets into the inspection stuff. You know that you have the right to inspect it. You don't have if you damage their property, you have to fix it. So it's always best to ask before you start maybe removing toilets or doing things for sewer and scope inspections. But it kind of walks you through all that. Due diligence documents. I was telling you about that up above a little bit. So I'm going to talk about it down here. Well, welcome to here. All right. So this is the due diligence documents. This is a section where you get to ask the seller for all sorts of things that you want to understand better about the house. Do not ask them for things you are not going to read or are not going to sway you. You're not going to use it in your decision to continue with the process of buying the house. All right. So there's a whole bunch of stuff in here about leases. If we know about leases, we'll ask about them. If there's tenants in there, we might want to know about that. Leased items, encumbered, there's debt that's not going to be paid off. You might want to ask about that. And here's where you get to say, you will take over the debt or you will not take over the debt. You can see I had it already pre-filled out as will not. So if for some reason you want to take over the buyer's debt or the seller's debt, we just need to know that. Here's a whole bunch of other stuff we could ask for. We could ask for any of this stuff, right? If we see a radon thing in there, we might want to know about radon, or if you're concerned about radon, we can ask for it, right? Past insurance claims, receipts, home improvements, warranties. If the seller's in possession of any of that stuff. But don't ask them again. Don't ask them for these things if you're not going to read them and you don't care. Make it blank. Blank is okay too. Or if there's other documents that you want to know about something, we can ask for it. We can add anything we want in here. That's why it's in here. Okay. So make sure we have in here only the documents that you're actually going to want to have. All right. And talk about notice to terminate and objections and resolutions, all those fun things. Conditional property. If you have a house you need to sell or some other condition, maybe you got to sell a car to make the mortgage work, we need to put that in there. We got to do. Source of water, did we receive the source of water from the seller prior to writing the offer? Yes or no? And what we're in here, is it a well? That kind of thing. That just tells you, is it on a well? Is it city water? Is there any source of water? Maybe you got to bring it in by wheelbarrow or something. Lead-based paint gets into that. Explains all that stuff. Carbon monoxide alarms, that, what the state's view on that is. Methamphetamine, that's meth, like the drug meth. If the seller knows that the property had meth in it and or tested positive for meth, they have to disclose it. If they knew that and they had it completely remediated, tested by an industrial hygienist, and it's certified to be clean or under state levels, that's what clean means, then they do not have to disclose that. However, most real estate offices highly encourage sellers to disclose it anyway, because nobody wants that surprise when they buy a house, right? Estoppel statements. So that's more applicable to that, if there's tenants living in the property and you're buying it and don't intend to live in it and have the tenants in there. Estoppel statements is a document that lets you know about the lease terms, conditions, financial situation of the tenants and the landlord. Closing documents. All right, so we talked about that a little bit. So who's preparing them? Are they included in this thing? When do they have to be? Who picks closing, listing, buyer's agent? Just know this: you get to pick when you sign, almost without question. So sometimes it's before the buyer, sometimes it's after the buyer, sometimes it's in the same location, sometimes it's not, sometimes it's in different conference rooms, sometimes it's the same conference room. I typically recommend different conference rooms, even if we're at the same location and sometimes at different times. Assignment of leases, if there's any, transfer of title. All right, so this is where we get to pick what kind of deed you want, the deed on the property. All right. The state of Colorado likes to recommend everyone pick a special warranty deed if you're buying a property, especially in the neighborhood. General warranty deed is a better deed than a special warranty deed. So Chris, what's the difference? Special warranty deed goes back and looks at when the seller purchased it. Was that a good sale? Did the seller at that time have legal rights to the property and could sell it? General warranty deed goes all the way back to the beginning of Colorado to determine if every one of those transfer legally. There is no cost difference between the two of these. So I typically tell the seller that you want a general warranty deed. And I tell my buyer, excuse me, you want a general warranty deed. And I tell my sellers, you want a special warranty deed. You want to offer that. Because less liability to the seller on this one, more on that one. More security for the buyer on this one, less for that one, right? So you can see why I do what I do. Whew. You're not going to believe this, but we're halfway through the document. It goes a little faster after this. There's 30 sections. All right. Payment of liens and encumbrances, unless agreed upon buyer in writing, the buyer's not going to pick up any of that stuff. The seller needs to pay all that stuff off. Closing costs. So this is another section where you get to pick who pays for what, depending on if you have like an HOA, right? Closing service fees. This is another section where you get to differentiate yourself from other buyers. You know, how much of this do you want to pick up at your own expense, and how much do you want to split? Maybe 1/2 by buyer, 1/2 by seller, or how much do you want the seller to pay for? This entire section typically isn't more than like $2 grand. You picked everything one way or the other. And most of these, if you don't have an HOA, it will be an NA anyway. But know that. So we'll go through these at the time that you write the offer, and kind of what's the situation, how aggressive do you want to be with your offer, and we kind of decide here what we want to do, what needs to be done. FERPTA is all about the seller, really. If we know the seller is a foreign person, we need to check that box a little different. Again, Colorado withholding is all about the seller. Proration of taxes. The taxes on the property are prorated. So the seller pays for the portion of the year that they lived in it, and you pay for the portion of the year that you buy it. You at closing will pay for the entire year taxes at that time. So if you're buying in the beginning of the year, you're going to have a big number added to your closing statement. If you're buying at the end of the year, you're going to have a little number. Closing statement. Rents, if there is anything else you would want prorated. So here's some examples of things you might want prorated. Association assessments, how that might work and who wants to pay for it. Possession, if the seller doesn't give you possession, you know, how much they're going to pay per day for staying in the house. Basically, what are you renting it to them for? We want that to be a big number because we want a hotel to be cheaper. General provisions. This gets into, you're going to see a whole lot of scrolling here, but this is stuff that you should read about, like the whole rest of the document. But not too many of these do you get to pick one way or the other. This talks about, you know, causes of loss of insurance, damage, inclusions in the services, condemnation, walkthrough condition, home warranties. You know, recommendations for legal counsel. This is a legal transaction. I am a realtor. I'm a licensed agent, and I get to practice real estate law within the bounds, very fine box the state of Colorado allows me to do. Sometimes we get outside of those, and I've got to direct you to an attorney or title company. But these has tax and legal consequences that maybe you should seek one anyway, an attorney. Time is of the essence. Again, this walks through, this is all general provision stuff. Mediation, legal counsel, earnest money. Did you notice we're on 23? Woo-hoo! All right. So what happens if there's an earnest money dispute? Walk you through that. Termination. How do you terminate this thing? This offer, if it goes sideways, how does that work? All right. This is the entire agreement. The buyer or the seller do not get to change the agreement unilaterally. They got to come to agreement to change anything in here. Notice of delivery, all that stuff. You can see the titles here. Acceptance and counterparts that are renting. You guys both agree to be civil, work together to solve the problem. And then here's a section of additional provisions, section 29 here, that I've pre-filled in a whole bunch of stuff that you get to maybe read through and decide if you want in there. It kind of gives you some ideas of what we can do in here. So you got some different clauses that I've added, stuff about wells, stuff about making non-refundable or repair stuff. You know, we've got more well stuff. We've got an escalation clause in here. You can read that and how we might make a variable priced offer, making the earnest money non-refundable. You know, that's something that whatever percentage we want. And then we have an appraisal gap clause. So, you know, if we need these, then I'll explain them more in detail. This is again a high level view. So just know that. But here's some I put the stuff in there so I don't forget to think about it, and I give it to you so you can read it and think about if you want to use it. All right. That's pretty much it. Really similar stuff down here, other documents, and then signature blocks and all that kind of stuff. Okay. So this is the general walkthrough of a contract to buy sell in the current state of the 2024 revision of this document. It does change from time to time, even mid-year, but just know that this is, you know, kind of walks you through that so you can see it. Again, this is not designed to replace a one-on-one with you. This is designed to give you an introduction to this contract so that you can ask smarter questions when we do go through a one-on-one. You've seen it before. You kind of understand how it's structured, what's in it. And then I give you more legal counsel then when we go through like how to use it, what the risks are of using some of these clauses, what do they mean, that kind of stuff. All right. So hopefully you found this useful and it wasn't too entirely boring. You know, and you know, you got to watch it at your own in your house on your phone, you know, when you wanted to fall asleep, whatever that might have been, you got to watch this and learn just a little bit more so that you're a better educated consumer than most and have a slightly better idea of what you're getting yourself into when you get to sign this thing here probably in the coming future, right? So thanks for watching. You know, drop me some feedback if you hate this or love it or whatever it might be. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, and talk to you later. See you soon. Bye.